Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is one of the most anticipated titles of E3, and after a 15-minute world premiere of gameplay, there is a lot to unpack. My name is Codiak, and today we'll take a look at every awesome detail showcased in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. So right off the bat, we got our first surprise with the introduction of a brand new droid, BD-1. This explorer droid is Cal's companion and rides in the player's back throughout your adventures. As you traverse the world, you'll be able to use the Force to manipulate objects like vines to gain access to more mobility options. Respawn Entertainment, known for their incredible work with character movement, showcases early on in the gameplay just how much thought they're putting into a player's ability to get around the world, showcasing a double jump or force jump to help bridge wide gaps. Shortly after, we see our first instance of wall running in the game. If you thought the guys behind the Titanfall series weren't going to put wall running into a Star Wars title, I don't know what you were thinking. To cap off this little parkour section, we see an interactable wall and a player's ability to climb vertically to gain access to new areas. Next, we break into a cutscene, and for all you Star Wars Universe fans out there, you'll be happy to know the team is working within the good graces of Lucasfilm, so expect to see familiar characters like Saw Gerrera throughout your adventure. At the end of the cutscene, we see our friendly NPCs bust out a number of grappling hooks, which could end up in the player's hands, but that remains to be seen. Right after the cutscene, we get our first look at the in-game map, or holo map. Players look to have 360 control of the map, as well as controls to zoom in and out of the area. Jumping back into the gameplay, we see Cal use his lightsaber as a flashlight to illuminate an area. It's hard to tell if this is player-controlled or scripted into the game, but still cool nonetheless. We get our first taste of Force Push right after, as Cal opens up a huge gap in a fractured wall. At this point, we've seen Force Push and Force Pull used to manipulate the environment, so keep that in mind as we move throughout the rest of the video. In this small cave section, Cal ends up balancing on a large root. It's hard to say if there's any chance for a player to fall, but it does look like there is some sort of player-controlled horizontal balancing. If we speed ahead, we get our first taste of combat in Fallen Order. We see a number of standard stormtroopers gathered outside a gate and a flurry of abilities that players will have access to. The first move we see is an aerial attack combining jumping with a downward lightsaber swing. Next, we see a simple blaster deflection resulting in a kill, as well as a whirlwind deflection that seems to reflect projectiles in an arc in front of the player. After that, we get our first combat Force Pull into a fantastic execution animation, and finally we end this skirmish with a Force Slow suspending animation of the last remaining enemy and killing him with a lightsaber throw. Once the enemies are dead, we see our first BD-1 interaction as he splices into the control panel to give players access to the facility. Shortly after, we run into our next wave of Scout Troopers, which are the first melee opponents we run into in the demo. The player uses a Force Push to fling a droid into the lead trooper, which could give us some indication that there will be more destructible environments or at least items in the world that players will be able to interact with. We get another taste of combat here and the reveal of our next ability, Force Charge. The player lunges forward and lands a wicked uppercut, killing the trooper. At the end of this battle, we get another taste of enemy executions. It's still too early to tell how an execute is handled since there was a limited UI during the demo, but a number of unique animations were shown throughout that may suggest every enemy has the potential to be executed. Before the final enemy is killed, we see an enemy pull off a parry, which is the first defensive skill we've seen melee opponents use in the game. Before entering the next room, we see on the screen that the player has gained a skill point, and although we never see a full skill tree, we can assume there is some sort of linear progression or talent system yet to be revealed. Fast forward to the next room and we get our first elite enemy wielding a vibro staff. If you haven't picked up on it already, target locking is part of the combat system, and throughout the trailer you can get a taste for how it will work when switching between enemies. The fight finally reveals a few more key features of the combat system, including some incredible dynamic combat animations. The player tries to force pull the enemy closer, but the opponent plants the vibro staff into the ground, resisting the ability. We also see our first dodge roll during the combat sequence, as well as a number of combat flips. After a series of back and forth exchanges, the enemy is executed, and the player recovers using a health pack from BD-1. It was confirmed after the demo that the player will have a limited number of stim packs available that they can use at any time, but there would be a window of vulnerability while they're recovering health. A few rooms later, we get another new enemy, the Flamethrower Trooper. The player uses a Force Freeze, which seems to be a step beyond Force Slow, to suspend an enemy in time. The player dispatches the enemy, and we see another small puzzle section where the player has to climb a wall to gain access to a panel. And this is where we see another BD1 interaction, Overcharge. In the next room, we get our first look at an enemy versus enemy combat, hinting that players may get the option to sit back and wait for enemies to kill each other before engaging in combat. Another new enemy, the Vishak, are revealed as giant spider-like creatures that use some sort of webbing to restrict a player's mobility. When the player gets wrapped up, we get a look at a quick time event system where a player must tap B repeatedly to break the web. This could be expanded further during specific fights, but this was the first quick time event we saw during the gameplay. This is also our first real look at lightsaber combos, and at this point it's hard to tell how deep the melee combat really is, but we did see a few different 2 and 3 strike variations. Fast forward to another creepy cave, and the player can be seen using a Force Echo to relive the last seconds of a dead enemy. This acts as sort of a lore component, and as we see on screen can be expanded upon in sort of a menu-driven lore compendium. The next combat sequence is slightly different than the previous ones because it showcased a reactionary execution. Once again, it's hard to pinpoint how the execution is pulled off because there is no UI, but it does stand out as a difference in comparison to the previous instances. While not in the gameplay demo itself, we see a scan action appear on screen briefly after the player defeats the Vishak. This looks to be another lore component for players looking to dive into the backstory of the world utilizing BD1. Moving ahead, we see a brief swimming section which could indicate some underwater sections throughout the game. And shortly after that, we get another instance of BD1's scan interaction, as well as another wall running sequence that features a gap jumping section that we haven't seen before. During the next combat sequence, we see much of the same except for an awesome force freeze, force pull combination that results in a stormtrooper taking his own blaster shot to the back of the head. In the final few minutes of the demo, we see another combat sequence that features our first environmental kill with a force push off of a ledge, as well as a Matrix-style dodge. As the demo comes to a close, we get a look at a few of the other enemies we will face, including the KX security droid like the one featured in Star Wars Rogue One, a Gatling gun-wielding stormtrooper, and of course, the AT Walker. So a lot to unpack as we look back at the first gameplay from Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I don't think I missed anything big, but if I did, let me know in the comment section below, and if you liked the video, be sure to subscribe because we've got a lot more E3 coverage coming your way, and that's sure to include some more Star Wars. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at the Game Gurus, thanks for watching, and play on.